Joining us now is Congresswoman Young Kim, Republican of California in the 40th Congressional District out in the Golden State. And Congresswoman, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Guy.
Well, we're delighted to have you here, and I want to welcome you back not just to the show, but to the country. You were part of this congressional delegation, bipartisan delegation, over to Taipei and Taiwan. If you could just give us some of your impressions of what you saw there, what you heard there, what you learned there, that you think listeners in this country need to know.
Sure. First of all, I want to say that it was such an honor for me to join CODEL, led by Chairman Michael McCall of the Foreign Affairs Committee. I am currently serving as chairwoman of the Indo-Pacific subcommittee, so it was very important for me to include our trip to closest allies and partners in the region, including Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan. The main takeaway from all of our meetings is that I think I can say that with certainty, our allies are worried about the growing aggression, and the United States must do more to rally our allies and partners to support Taiwan. And we met with the high-level officials in all countries, meeting with the Prime Minister in Kishida in Japan, President Yoon in South Korea, President Tsai in Taiwan. She actually came back just in time to meet with our congressional delegation after she met with Speaker McCarthy here in California just the day before. And so this was very significant. And the key takeaways, obviously, are that, this is something that we heard on this trip, that PRC wants to defeat enemy, which is Taiwan, by defeating its first enemy, which is the United States. I thought that was a really big takeaway from what we heard, and we obviously showed our bipartisan support, meeting with Kevin McCarthy, Speaker, with bringing bipartisan delegation here, and then again in Taiwan. I think it really spoke volume about how we view Taiwan, who is a friend in freedom and democracy, especially in global health security.
I want to come back to what we can do on behalf of Taiwan to support our friends and our allies there in that democracy. First, though, I want to touch on something you just mentioned, which is the bipartisan nature of this support. There is a bipartisan group gathered in Simi Valley with the Speaker, with President Tsai, led, of course, by the Speaker and also Chairman Gallagher. And then on your trip, it was members of both parties. And we've seen in recent years, certainly in the last year plus, for example, on CODELs to Poland, and then incursions into Ukraine by certain members of Congress in both houses, both parties. It seems like a lot of those trips have been partisan, where Republicans go together to Ukraine and meet with Zelensky and have a photo op and come back and talk to the cameras and talk to their audiences. Then there's another trip where Democrats go and they do the same and then they come back. So even though there's a lot of bipartisanship on the question, just to give that example of the Ukraine war and the war effort against Russia, the trips haven't exactly been bipartisan in nature themselves, whereas both of these recent events, one in the U.S., one in Taiwan, were explicitly and significantly bipartisan. What is the meaning behind that? What's the significance in your mind of showing that united front, not just to our friends, but also to our adversaries, for example, Chairman Xi and the Politburo in Beijing?
Right. As you correctly noted, the meeting with Speaker, with bipartisan delegation here, and also us traveling in a bipartisan way, we brought those bipartisan message to Taiwan. And for the purpose of getting the message to Xi Jinping, ultimately, that anything to do with Taiwan is bipartisan. That's why it was so important for us to make sure that this was a bipartisan group, to show that, because we know China will not stop at Taiwan. All countries will be threatened. And threat to freedom anywhere is threat to freedom everywhere. That's why in Japan and in South Korea, we had candid discussions about how they view their security environments, and we had open discussion about PRC's aggression towards Taiwan. this is the type of conversation we could not have had even a few years ago. So I think what we need to do is definitely we need to equip Taiwan to be able to defend themselves, because Taiwanese people are determined, but they would be more determined if Taiwan has more stockpile to defend themselves. They have the same will and desire to fight and defend their freedom and democracy as much as Ukrainians did. But it is impossible if we don't equip Taiwan. Remember, Taiwan already purchased and paid for about $19 billion of arms, weapons, equipment that the United States has yet to deliver. So that is what we need to do right now. Keep our promise that we made, give them what they already paid for, and make sure they're getting it. That's why we introduced and passed the Arms Export Delivery Act. This will track what arms that Taiwan asked for, what we have delivered, which, as I said, 0 to this day. And we asked them to give Congress a report by March 1, 2023. And we're already middle of April. So they are way overdue. So we're going to keep on. When we go back next week, we're going to ask the State Department and our administration to give us that report that's already overdue. So what did they ask for? Why is there a delay? When can we expect to make these deliveries? Especially now when China responds angrily, aggressively with speakers meeting with President Tsai and President Tsai meeting with our congressional delegation. When we landed on Taiwan on the day, there were 3 fighter vessels on the Taiwan Strait, clearly trying to intimidate us from coming to Taiwan and meeting with the government and military officials in Taiwan. At the same time, my offices, both in Washington and district offices, were receiving calls from the Chinese government not to meet. They knew I was on that Codel. They said, we know your boss is on that Codel. We advise you not to because this will be in violation of the One China policy. Well, we're not going to be intimidated.
Wow.
We weren't deterred.
Well, I'm glad that you weren't, and I'm glad that you went. And just last question, and I'll just point out, to me it seems like the absolute bare minimum for the United States to deliver the weapons that Taiwan has already paid for. It's the absolute bare minimum, and I think we can probably do more than that. When you mentioned some of the hostility from the Chinese and some of the threats, some of the warnings, then as soon as you guys were leaving, there were military drills and more provocative actions by the CCP. You juxtapose that with what we heard from the president of France, who was really cozying up to Xi and breaking with the United States in a number of significant ways based on quotes that Politico reported. I just wonder how you react to that, seeing an ally, at least supposedly an ally, the leader of a Western European country, breaking with the United States, warning the United States, trying to rally Europe farther away from the United States in terms of the transatlantic relationship and alliance, while also saying things, including about Taiwan specifically, that were met with basically loud cheering from the CCP. It was just a little bit jarring to see that and to juxtapose that performance from Macron with the delegation that you were a part of and the trip from President Tsai to the United States happening almost simultaneously.
Certainly, his comments is not helpful at all. If we want freedom to prevail over authoritarianism, we need to support our freedom-loving allies. So Macron's appeasing CCP definitely is not going to help France or other partners in Europe, certainly not in Asia, and with our allies and partners in Indo-Pacific. This is the reason why we need to have serious dialogue, and I would urge our State Department to start having this conversation with our allies in the region now, not later, about the potential contingency.